A 12-year-old girl embarks alone on her first international flight, unaware that she is about to rewrite her own story. During the trip, an unknown businessman drops an intimate photo of her family, sparking a mystery that threatens everything she believes she knows. When he suffers a heart attack and murmurs names from her past, doubt turns into an urgent need for answers. It is the beginning of a transformative journey, where truth, courage, and chosen love intertwine in a quest that goes far beyond heritage. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The rain pounded against the grand windows of Evergreen Manor, the sprawling estate nestled in the outskirts of Seattle, where the mountains met the mist. Inside, Robert Blackwood stood motionless, watching droplets race down the glass, each one a fleeting memory of what once was. 5 years had passed since the accident that took away his wife Eleanor and their daughter Charlotte. Yet time had frozen for him on that fateful night. Robert had once been Seattle's most admired tech entrepreneur, a visionary who transformed a small startup into Blackwood Technologies, a billion-dollar company. But success meant nothing without his family. After the tragedy, he had gradually withdrawn from public life, selling his controlling stake in the company and retreating to this mansion, where silence was his only companion. The manor, once vibrant with life and laughter, now echoed with emptiness. Rooms remained untouched, preserving the past like a museum of grief. The most painful area was the garden, Eleanor's sanctuary, her masterpiece. She had spent countless hours nurturing each plant, transforming the 2-acre space into a breathtaking paradise that had once been featured in Seattle's prestigious garden tours. "You promised to keep it alive," Robert whispered to himself, his breath fogging the window as he looked out at the neglected garden. What had once been a symphony of colors was now a graveyard of withered plants. The ornate fountains stood dry, the stone pathways disappeared under weeds, and the once blooming roses had surrendered to decay. Each time he attempted to step into that space, memories of Eleanor's smile as she tended to her beloved flowers paralyzed him. The staff had dwindled over the years. Most couldn't bear the melancholy that permeated the estate. Only Mrs. Peterson, the elderly housekeeper who had known Robert since he was a boy, remained, stubbornly refusing to abandon him to complete solitude. She maintained the necessary parts of the house, but respected his unspoken rule. The garden was not to be touched. Thunder rolled across the sky as evening settled in. Robert made his way to his study, where financial reports awaited his disinterested review. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, his nightly ritual to numb the persistent ache. Just as he was about to take the first sip, an unfamiliar sound broke through the rain's rhythm. The doorbell rang. Robert froze. No one had rung that bell in years. Clients, lawyers, and the occasional family member knew to call first, and even then, he rarely granted audiences. Mrs. Peterson had left hours ago. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in ages, pushed him toward the entrance hall. Through the security monitor, he saw a small figure standing at the doorstep, a child, drenched from the storm, shoulders hunched against the wind. His instinct was to ignore it. Whatever charity or Girl Scout cookies were being sold could wait for another day, another house. Yet something in the child's posture, a certain vulnerability mixed with determination, compelled him to open the door, if only a crack. Before him stood a girl no older than 10. Her clothes were soaked and tattered, her sneakers caked with mud. Golden hair, darkened by rain, clung to her pale face, but it was her eyes that struck him, a piercing blue that seemed oddly familiar. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I'm really hungry. Could you spare something to eat?" Robert's expression hardened. Seattle had shelters for situations like this. Where were her parents? Why was she wandering alone in this isolated area? "There's a community center about 3 miles down the road," he replied coolly. "They can help you." He began closing the door, but the girl's next words stopped him. "I could work for it," she insisted, her small hand pressing against the door. "I noticed your garden needs help. I'm good with plants. My mom taught me everything about flowers." A sharp pain twisted in Robert's chest at the mention of the garden. How dare this child presume to touch Eleanor's sacred space? He almost dismissed her then and there, but a flash of lightning illuminated her face, determined yet gentle, strong yet fragile. "You're just a kid," he said dismissively. "That garden is beyond saving." "Nothing's beyond saving if you care enough," she replied with unexpected wisdom. Maybe it was the rain, or perhaps the bourbon he'd already consumed, or the strange familiarity in her eyes. Whatever the reason, Robert found himself stepping aside. "Kitchen's this way," he muttered. "You can have a sandwich and dry off, then you're leaving." The girl followed him through the grand hallway, her eyes widening at the crystal chandeliers and priceless artwork. The kitchen, with its professional-grade appliances and marble countertops, seemed to intimidate her. "I'm Emma," she offered as she climbed onto a bar stool. "Mr. Blackwood," he replied curtly, assembling a sandwich without asking her preferences. He placed it before her along with a glass of milk. Emma ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last meal. Robert observed her from across the counter, noticing a small scar above her right eyebrow and the way she tucked her hair. Behind her ear, a gesture that triggered a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Where do you live, Emma?" he finally asked. She chewed thoughtfully before answering. "With my Aunt Margaret over in Maple Valley, but she's not feeling well today. Sometimes it's better if I'm not around when she's not feeling well." The careful way she worded her response suggested there was more to the story. Robert had been a businessman long enough to recognize evasion. "And your parents?" Emma's eyes clouded. "I don't remember them much. There was an accident when I was little." Robert's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of accident?" "A car crash, I think. Aunt Margaret doesn't like talking about it." She traced a pattern on the countertop with her finger. "Sometimes I have dreams about a big house with a beautiful garden. There are butterflies everywhere. And a woman with a kind smile is reading me stories." The glass nearly slipped from Robert's hand. Charlotte had been obsessed with butterflies. Eleanor had planted butterfly bushes throughout the garden, creating a haven for the delicate creatures. She had read to Charlotte every night, doing different voices for each character. "It's just dreams, though," Emma continued, oblivious to his reaction. "Aunt Margaret says I have an overactive imagination." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Emma hopped down from the stool and carried her plate to the sink. "Thank you for the sandwich, Mr. Blackwood. I can start on your garden tomorrow, if that's okay." Robert should have said no. He should have called social services or driven her to the community center himself. Instead, he heard himself say, "Be here at 9. Don't be late." After she left, Robert found himself drawn to the room he'd avoided for years, Charlotte's bedroom. Everything remained exactly as it had been. The butterfly-themed bedspread, the bookshelf filled with children's stories, the collection of stuffed animals. He opened the jewelry box on the dresser and removed a small silver bracelet with a butterfly charm, Charlotte's prized possession, recovered from the accident scene. Sleep eluded him that night. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "Nothing's beyond saving if you care enough." Could it be possible? The resemblance, the dreams she described, the timing of the accident. For the first time in years, Robert felt something stirring within him, a dangerous, fragile thing he'd thought long buried beneath grief and isolation. Hope. The morning arrived with a clarity that Seattle rarely offered. Robert awoke earlier than usual, his mind filled with doubts about the previous night's encounter. Surely the girl wouldn't return. Children were unreliable, especially ones with apparent home difficulties. He told himself it was for the best. The garden was Eleanor's legacy, not a project for some strange child. Yet at precisely 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the window, Robert spotted Emma standing on the porch, wearing the same worn clothes but now dry. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and beside her sat a small backpack. "You actually came," he remarked as he opened the door, unable to hide his surprise. Emma smiled, a bright expression that briefly transformed her face. "I promised I would. I always keep my promises." Something about that statement, the earnestness in her voice, reminded him painfully of Charlotte, who at 5 years old had solemnly declared that Blackwoods never break promises. It had been Eleanor's family motto, one she had instilled in their daughter from an early age. Robert led Emma through the house to the French doors that opened onto the once magnificent garden. He hadn't stepped outside in nearly 3 years. The last attempt had ended with him collapsing among the roses, overcome by grief. "It's pretty bad," he warned as he unlocked the doors. "Maybe beyond saving, like I said." Emma stepped out onto the stone terrace, surveying the scene before her. Where formal hedges had once created elegant pathways, now tangled masses of branches sprawled unchecked. The koi pond had dried up, leaving only a cracked basin. Weeds had colonized the flower beds, and the ornamental trees drooped with neglect. Instead of being intimidated, Emma's eyes lit up with determination. "It's just sleeping," she declared, moving toward a rose bush that appeared completely lifeless. She knelt beside it, gently, pushing aside dead leaves to reveal a tiny green shoot at its base. "See, it remembers what it's supposed to be." Robert stared at the fragile green sprout, a lump forming in his throat. How had he not noticed these small signs of life persisting, amid the desolation? "Where do we start?" he asked, surprising himself with the "we." Emma glanced up at him. "Do you have any gardening tools?" The tool shed stood at the far end of the garden, untouched for years. Inside, Eleanor's tools hung. In perfect order, she had been meticulous about maintenance. Robert handed Emma a pair of pruning shears that seemed too large for her small hands. "Maybe I should do the cutting," he suggested, watching her struggle with the weight. "You could help," she agreed, "if you want to." And so, on that clear Seattle morning, Robert Blackwood found himself kneeling in the dirt for the first time since Eleanor's passing. Emma worked beside him, humming softly as she cleared debris from around the struggling rosebush. She moved with surprising efficiency, as if she'd done this countless times before. "My mum loved roses too," Emma commented as they worked. "At least I think she did. I remember someone telling me stories about a rose that could talk." "Beauty and the Beast," Robert suggested, the conversation feeling surreal. Emma shook her head. "No, it was different. The rose had a special name." She frowned, trying to recall. "Whisper, that was it. The rose that whispered secrets." Robert nearly dropped the shears. The Whispering Rose had been a bedtime story that Eleanor had invented for Charlotte. A tale about a magical rose in their garden that collected wishes and made them come true. No one else knew about that story. They had never published it or shared it outside their family. "Where did you hear that story?" he asked, his voice strained. Emma's brow furrowed. "I don't remember. Maybe Aunt Margaret told me." She didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe I dreamed it. I have lots of dreams about gardens and stories." Throughout the morning, similar moments occurred. Emma knew exactly where the butterfly garden had been located, though it was now indistinguishable from the rest of the overgrowth. She insisted on clearing that area first, saying, "The butterflies will want to come back." Charlotte had always worried about the butterflies having enough flowers. By noon, they had cleared a small section near the terrace. Robert was surprised by how much they'd accomplished and by how the physical labor had temporarily quieted his mind. For hours, he hadn't thought about conference calls or investment portfolios. He'd simply focused on the task at hand, guided by this strange child who seemed to intuitively understand the garden's original design. When Mrs. Peterson arrived to prepare lunch, she nearly dropped her purse at the sight of Robert covered in dirt, working in the garden with a young girl. He couldn't recall the last time he'd seen such astonishment on the housekeeper's face. "Mr. Blackwood," she exclaimed. "What on earth?" "Mrs. Peterson, this is Emma," Robert explained, suddenly feeling foolish. "She's helping with the garden." The elderly woman's gaze softened as she looked at Emma. "Well, it's about time someone did. That garden has been crying out for attention." She turned to Robert. "Shall I prepare lunch for two, then?" Over sandwiches on the terrace, Robert observed Emma more carefully. The way she tilted her head when thinking, the small dimple that appeared when she smiled, these details tugged at his memory. She ate neatly but hungrily, as if good meals weren't guaranteed in her life. "Tell me about your aunt," Robert prompted. Emma's expression clouded. "She tries her best, I guess. Sometimes she gets sick and can't take care of things. The house gets messy and there's not much food. She hesitated. She has special medicine that makes her act funny. Alcohol, Robert surmised. Does she work? Sometimes. She loses jobs a lot. Emma shrugged, displaying the resignation of a child accustomed to adult problems. That's why I learned to do things myself. And school? He pressed. I go when I can. I like reading the best. Her face brightened. I read a whole book about gardens last month. That's how I know about pruning and stuff. But her knowledge went beyond what any book could teach. She understood this specific garden, its layout and peculiarities, in ways that seemed impossible for a stranger. As they returned to work, Emma began humming again, a melody that Robert recognized immediately. Eleanor's Lullaby, a tune she had composed herself for Charlotte. He nearly stumbled, steadying himself against a tree. That song, he said quietly. Where did you learn it? Emma looked confused. What song? Was I humming? Yes, you were humming a very specific melody. I don't know. Sometimes songs just come into my head. She returned to clearing debris, oblivious to his distress. By late afternoon, Emma announced she needed to leave. Aunt Margaret will be looking for me, she explained, though she didn't sound convinced. Robert felt an inexplicable anxiety at the thought of her returning to her aunt. Will you come back tomorrow? He asked, trying to sound casual. Emma nodded eagerly. Can I? There's so much more to do. After she left, Robert went straight to his study and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay a file labeled Accident Report, documents he'd been unable to read for years. His hands trembled as he spread the papers across his desk. The police report detailed how Eleanor's car had plunged off the road during a rainstorm. Eleanor had been found immediately, pronounced lost at the scene. Charlotte had been thrown from the vehicle, her small body recovered several hours later. Due to the condition of the scene and the chaos of that stormy night, there had been confusion at the hospital. Robert had been too distraught to question the processes, relying on hospital staff and his legal team to handle the painful details. One page caught his attention. The DNA verification form was marked inconclusive, additional testing required. Robert frowned. He didn't recall ever seeing a follow-up report. In his grief-stricken state, had he missed something crucial? Another document, a transfer authorization to the county morgue, bore only one signature where two were required. Discrepancies that meant nothing to a grieving husband now stood out to the methodical businessman. Robert reached for his phone and dialed the number of his former assistant, Caroline Barnes, now CEO of his charitable foundation. Caroline, I need you to find every record related to the accident 5 years ago. Hospital reports, police documents, everything. Robert, is everything all right? Her voice was concerned. These were waters they hadn't navigated in years. I'm not sure, he replied honestly, but I need to know. After hanging up, Robert found himself drawn to Charlotte's room again. He opened her closet, where her clothes still hung in neat rows. At the back, he found what he was looking for, the butterfly costume she'd worn for her last Halloween. He held it up, examining the wingspan. It would fit Emma perfectly. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Was it possible? Could Emma somehow be Charlotte? The timeline matched. The knowledge of the garden, the stories, the lullaby, details no stranger could know. But if Charlotte had survived, who was the child they had buried? And who would have orchestrated such a devastating deception? For the first time in 5 years, Robert felt truly awake. If there was even the slightest chance that Emma was his daughter, he would move heaven and earth to uncover the truth. And if someone had deliberately separated them, there would be a reckoning. Tomorrow, Emma would return to tend the garden, and Robert would begin his own process of excavation, digging not for roots but for truths long buried. Seattle General Hospital stood imposing against the gray morning sky, its modern glass architecture a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil churning inside Robert. He had spent a restless night piecing together fragments of possibility, his mind oscillating between cautious hope and fear of disappointment. Before Emma's scheduled arrival at the manor, he had one crucial stop to make. The records department was located in the hospital's east wing, a labyrinth of sterile corridors that seemed designed to discourage visitors. Robert straightened his tie and approached the reception desk, where a young man with tired eyes barely glanced up from his computer. "I need to see all records related to the Blackwood accident from 5 years ago," Robert stated, sliding his ID across the counter. The clerk's demeanor shifted upon recognizing the name. Mr. Blackwood. Those records would require proper authorization forms. Medical privacy laws. "I understand privacy laws better than most," Robert interrupted, his voice low but firm. "I'm requesting information about my wife and daughter. I've already submitted the necessary paperwork through my foundation." This was true. Caroline had worked through the night to expedite the process. After several tense minutes and a supervisor consultation, Robert was escorted to a small consultation room. The files that arrived were thinner than expected, contained in a single manila folder, rather than the comprehensive documentation he'd anticipated. "Is this everything?" he asked the clerk who delivered them. "According to our system, yes, sir." The first red flag was immediate. The records were disorganized, with several key documents missing. The official cause for Eleanor was clearly documented, but Charlotte's medical records were sparse. The inconclusive DNA test he'd noticed yesterday was present, but there was no follow-up. Most concerning was a notation about Patient X, an unidentified female child admitted the same night, with injuries consistent with the accident. Robert's pulse quickened. "I need to speak with Dr. Williams," he said, referencing the physician who had overseen the emergency response that night. "Dr. Williams no longer works here, sir. He relocated to Boston 3 years ago." Then whoever handled pediatric emergency cases that night. After more waiting, a Dr. Patel arrived, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Blackwood, I was on call that night, though I wasn't the primary physician for your family. How can I help?" Robert showed her the notation about Patient X. "What can you tell me about this unidentified child?" Dr. Patel frowned, studying the document. "This is unusual. Typically, unidentified patients receive temporary names until we establish identity. Let me check something." She left the room briefly, returning with her tablet. According to the system, this patient was transferred to Cascade Children's Hospital 2 days after admission. Stable condition, but identity still unconfirmed. "And my daughter's remains?" Dr. Patel's frown deepened as she reviewed the files. "The documentation here is incomplete. There should be a chain of custody form for transfer to the mortuary, but it's missing." She looked genuinely troubled. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't want to give you false hope, but these irregularities are concerning from a procedural standpoint. Who would have authorized these transfers? Both of my daughter and this unidentified patient. Hospital administration and the attending physician. In high-profile cases like yours, there's often additional oversight from legal departments." She hesitated. The administrator at that time was Gregory Newell. He's still with the hospital, though now in a different capacity. Robert made a mental note of the name. "Thank you, Dr. Patel, you've been very helpful." Instead of seeking out Newell immediately, Robert drove to Cascade Children's Hospital. His instincts told him to gather as much information as possible before confronting anyone directly. At Cascade, however, he hit a wall. Their records showed no unidentified female child transferred from Seattle General on the dates in question. "That's impossible," Robert insisted to the records manager. "I have documentation of the transfer." The manager, a meticulous woman with wire-rimmed glasses, shook her head. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been in this position for 15 years. Our records are impeccable. If a child was transferred here, there would be documentation." "Unless someone deliberately removed it," Robert suggested. Her expression shifted slightly. "That would be extremely difficult and highly unethical. However," she lowered her voice, "there was an incident about 4 years ago. A security breach in our electronic record system. Some files were potentially compromised." Robert's next stop was the Department of Child Services. If a child had been separated from her family and not claimed, there would be a paper trail through the foster system. The building was outdated, with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead and faded posters about child safety on the walls. After explaining his situation to 3 different employees, Robert was finally directed to Diane Coleman, a veteran social worker with grey-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "Mr. Blackwood, I remember your case," she said, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Such a tragedy. How can I help you after all this time?" Robert carefully outlined his suspicions, watching her reaction. To his surprise, she didn't dismiss him outright. "There was something unusual," she admitted after he finished. "An emergency placement request came through for a child approximately your daughter's age, just days after the accident. The paperwork was rushed, which happens in emergencies, but the authorizing signatures were, let's say, they raised questions." "What kind of questions?" "The judge who supposedly signed off on the placement was on vacation that week. I flagged it with my supervisor, but was told to process it anyway. The child was placed with a Margaret Wilson in Maple Valley." Robert's heart nearly stopped. Margaret Wilson, the name of Emma's aunt. "This child, was there a name?" Ms. Coleman consulted her computer. "Emma Doe. That's typically what we use for unidentified female children. Jane or Emma Doe?" "Emma." The coincidence was too great. "I need that address in Maple Valley." Ms. Coleman hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your suspicions, but I can't release that information without proper channels. If you believe your daughter might still be alive, we need to involve law enforcement." "I'm not ready for that yet," Robert replied. "I need more evidence first." She regarded him sympathetically. "Then I suggest you contact Brightwood Children's Home. That's where the child was initially placed before the foster assignment. Sarah Jenkins is still the director there. Perhaps she can provide more insight." Robert thanked her and headed immediately to Brightwood, a modest facility on the outskirts of Seattle. The grounds were well maintained, with a playground visible from the parking lot. Inside, cheerful artwork decorated the walls, a stark contrast to the institutional feel of the DCS office. Sarah Jenkins was not what Robert expected. Young, maybe mid-30s, with a polished appearance that seemed at odds with the non-profit setting. Her office was meticulously organized, awards and certifications prominently displayed. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is an unexpected honor. How can our humble organization be of service to you?" Robert decided on directness. "I'm looking for information about a child who was placed here approximately 5 years ago, a girl named Emma Doe." The change in Jenkins' demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening of her shoulders. "I'm afraid resident information is confidential, Mr. Blackwood. Surely you understand." "This isn't just any child," Robert pressed. "I have reason to believe she might be my daughter, Charlotte." Jenkins' laugh was too quick, too dismissive. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm terribly sorry for your loss, but this sounds like wishful thinking. Your daughter's passing was well documented." "Was it? Because I'm finding significant gaps in that documentation." Something hardened in Jenkins' expression. "I can't help you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with our board in 10 minutes. As Robert stood to leave, his gaze fell on a photograph on her desk. Jenkins shaking hands with a familiar figure. James Harrington, his former business partner, and the man who had tried to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Blackwood Technologies shortly before the accident. The connection struck him like lightning. James had been furious when Robert blocked the takeover, vowing revenge. Could his vendetta have extended beyond business into the unthinkable? Outside in the parking lot, Robert called Caroline. "I need everything you can find on Sarah Jenkins, director of Brightwood Children's Home, and her connection to James Harrington. And locate Margaret Wilson in Maple Valley. Property records, utility bills, anything." Back at Evergreen Manor, Robert arrived just as Emma was walking up the driveway. Seeing her now, the golden hair, the determined set of her small shoulders, sent a wave of emotion through him. How had he not seen it immediately? She was Eleanor's daughter through and through, with his own stubborn chin. "You're late," Emma called out with a hint of reproach that was so familiar it hurt. Charlotte had always been stickler for punctuality, just like her father. "Sorry," Robert replied, forcing a casual tone. "I had some business in the city." Together they continued the garden restoration, working on the butterfly section that Emma had been so determined to revive. As they cleared dead branches and turned soil, Robert asked carefully crafted questions. "Have you lived with your Aunt Margaret your whole life?" Emma shook her head, focused on extracting a particularly stubborn weed. "No, just since after the accident. Before that I was somewhere else, but I don't remember much. Do you remember your parents at all?" She paused, wiping dirt from her forehead with the back of her hand, exactly as Eleanor used to do. "Sometimes I think I do. I remember a man with a deep voice who used to carry me on his shoulders, and someone singing to me at night." She looked up at him. "But Aunt Margaret says that's just my imagination. She says my parents didn't want me." The cruelty of that lie made Robert's blood boil. "I'm sure that's not true, Emma." "How do you know?" she asked, her blue eyes searching his face. "Because any parent would be lucky to have you," he answered truthfully. As they worked, Emma began humming Eleanor's lullaby again. This time, Robert gently joined in, watching her reaction closely. Emma stopped abruptly. "You know that song?" "Yes, I do. It's very special to me." Her eyes widened. "I didn't know other people knew it." "It's just always been in my head," she frowned. "Sometimes when I hum it, Aunt Margaret gets mad. She says it's annoying." By late afternoon, they had made remarkable progress. The butterfly garden was taking shape again, with new plants ready to be added. As Emma gathered her backpack to leave, Robert made a decision. "Emma, would you like to stay for dinner? Mrs. Peterson is making pasta, and there's plenty." Her face lit up before doubt crept in. "I should probably go home. Aunt Margaret might be worried." "We could call her," Robert suggested, knowing it was unlikely this aunt was concerned about Emma's whereabouts. "She doesn't have a phone right now," Emma replied, the practiced excuse of a child covering for adult failings. "But maybe tomorrow I could stay longer. I really like being here." As she walked down the driveway, Robert felt a painful tugging in his chest. He was letting his daughter, he was now almost certain Emma was Charlotte, walk away to a home where she was unwanted and neglected. But rushing things could backfire catastrophically. If James Harrington was indeed behind this deception, the man was powerful enough to make Emma disappear again before Robert could establish legal claim. His phone rang, Caroline with information. Margaret Wilson's address confirmed she lived in a rundown apartment complex in Maple Valley. More disturbing was her background: 3 DUIs, multiple jobs lost due to alcohol issues, and a distant cousin of James Harrington's former executive assistant. "And Sarah Jenkins?" Robert asked. "Received a substantial promotion right after your accident, went from assistant director to director overnight, with a significant salary increase. And here's the kicker: Brightwood receives major funding from the Harrington Foundation." The pieces were aligning into a horrifying picture. James hadn't just wanted to hurt Robert professionally. He had engineered the ultimate personal destruction, separating him from his surviving daughter, leaving them both to suffer in different kinds of isolation. "Caroline, I need the best family lawyer in Seattle. And contact Thomas. It's time I spoke with my brother." Thomas, a renowned pediatric surgeon, and Robert's estranged brother, had tried to support Robert after the accident. But in his grief, Robert had pushed everyone away, including the one person whose medical expertise might now prove invaluable. That night, Robert stood in Charlotte's preserved bedroom, holding the silver butterfly bracelet. The determination that had made him a business titan crystallized into something even more powerful: a father's resolve to reclaim his child. "I'm coming for you, Charlotte," he whispered. "I promise." The morning dew glistened on the newly cleared sections of the garden as Robert waited for Emma's arrival. After another night of minimal sleep, he had risen before dawn to continue researching. Michael Bennett, Seattle's most formidable family attorney, was scheduled to arrive that afternoon. Thomas had agreed to drive up from Portland, where he now headed the pediatric surgery department at Oregon Health Sciences University. Robert checked his watch, 9:15. Emma was late, unusual for a child who had been so punctual. By 9:30, anxiety gnawed at him. By 10 he was pacing the driveway, debating whether to drive to Maple Valley himself. At 10:23, a battered Honda pulled up. Emma emerged from the passenger side, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and relief. A woman stumbled out from the driver's seat, disheveled, with bloodshot eyes and the unmistakable demeanor of someone nursing a hangover. "You must be the garden man," she called out, her voice too loud for the peaceful morning. "Emma won't shut up about this place." Robert approached carefully, assessing Margaret Wilson in person. Up close, she looked even worse, skin pallid, hands trembling slightly. This was the woman who had been entrusted with his daughter, Robert Blackwood. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Margaret's eyes widened slightly at the name. A flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. "Margaret Wilson, Emma's aunt." She took his hand briefly, her palm clammy. "Sorry she's late. My car wouldn't start." "It's no problem," Robert replied, keeping his tone neutral despite the rage simmering beneath. "Emma's been a tremendous help with my garden restoration." Margaret glanced around at the estate, her expression calculating. "Must be nice having all this. Emma says you live here alone?" "I do." Robert turned to Emma, whose discomfort was palpable. "Why don't you go get started? The new butterfly bushes were delivered this morning." Emma nodded gratefully and hurried toward the garden shed, clearly eager to escape the interaction. "Cute kid," Margaret commented once Emma was out of earshot. "Always was imaginative, makes up all sorts of stories." "Does she?" Robert kept, his voice casual. "What kind of stories?" Margaret shrugged. "Oh, you know kids, princesses, talking animals, fantasy parents who actually want her." She laughed, then caught herself. "I mean, her real parents couldn't keep her. I stepped up, being family and all." "That was generous of you," Robert said, fighting to maintain his composed facade. "How exactly are you related to Emma?" Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting away. "Through her mother's side, second cousin or something. Listen, what time should I pick her up? I've got appointments later." "I can drive her home," Robert offered. "We have a lot of work to do today, and I'm happy to have her stay for dinner." Relief washed over Margaret's face. "That would be great, actually. Address is 742 Elmwood, apartment 3C in Maple Valley." She was already backing toward her car. "Emma has a key." As the Honda disappeared down the driveway, Robert allowed his mask to drop, his expression hardening. Margaret Wilson might be a pawn in this scheme, but she was a willing one, caring more about whatever compensation she received than Emma's well-being. In the garden, Emma was already at work, carefully planting one of the new butterfly bushes. The focused determination on her face reminded Robert so much of Eleanor that his chest ached. "Your aunt seems," he began, unsure how to proceed. "She's having one of her bad days," Emma replied without looking up, her small hands patting. "Soil around the plant's base. But it's okay, she let me come here, so that's good." Robert knelt beside her. "Emma, does your aunt take good care of you?" Emma's hands stilled. "She tries sometimes." The diplomatic answer of a child who had learned to make excuses for adults. "The apartment gets really messy, and sometimes there isn't food, but it's not her fault she gets sick a lot." "Being sick doesn't excuse neglecting a child," Robert said gently. Emma finally looked at him, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Are you going to tell someone? Because if they take me away from Aunt Margaret, I might have to go somewhere worse. Or I might not be allowed to come here anymore." The thought clearly terrified her, and Robert realized she had found something in this garden, and perhaps in him, that she desperately needed. "I won't do anything that would keep you from coming here," he promised. "Now show me where you want to plant the rest of these bushes." They worked side by side throughout the morning, restoring the central fountain that had once been the garden's showpiece. Emma seemed to know exactly where each piece belonged, as if she had helped build it originally. When Robert commented on this, she shrugged. "It just feels right. Like I've seen it before." She tilted her head, studying the half-assembled structure. "There should be dolphins at the top, right? 4 of them, spouting water." Robert stared at her, astonished. The dolphin finials had been a custom design, commissioned by Eleanor from an Italian sculptor. They were currently in storage in the basement, not visible anywhere on the property. "How did you know that, Emma?" "I dreamed about them," she replied simply. I dream about this place a lot. Is that weird? Before Robert could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared, announcing that lunch was ready. She had taken an immediate liking to Emma, fussing over her and preparing all the foods the girl mentioned enjoying. Dr. Thomas called, Mrs. Peterson informed Robert as they headed inside. He'll be here by 3, and Mr. Bennett has arrived early. He's waiting in your study. Emma looked up curiously. Who are those people? My brother and my lawyer, Robert explained. They're helping me with some important business. Is it about the garden? Emma asked. Robert smiled. In a way, yes, it's about restoring things to how they should be. After lunch, Robert excused himself to meet with Michael Bennett, leaving Emma with Mrs. Peterson, who had offered to teach her how to make Eleanor's famous chocolate chip cookies, another detail that struck Robert profoundly, as these had been Charlotte's favorite. Bennett was a commanding presence, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of a man used to winning. Robert, he greeted, rising from his seat. Caroline briefed me on the situation. Extraordinary circumstances, to say the least. But you believe it's possible? Robert asked, getting straight to the point. Based on the documentation you've gathered, yes, it's possible. Unlikely, but possible. Bennett spread several folders on the desk. I've already filed motions for complete access to the hospital records and an emergency hearing regarding the child's placement. However, we need more concrete evidence before making any formal claim that Emma Wilson is Charlotte Blackwood. Such as DNA testing, for one. But obtaining that legally without alerting Margaret Wilson or whoever might be behind this would be challenging. Bennett leaned forward. Robert, you need to understand what we're potentially dealing with. If James Harrington orchestrated this, as you suspect, he won't give up easily. The man has resources and connections throughout Seattle. So do I, Robert countered. And I have something Harrington doesn't, the truth. Their discussion was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson announcing Thomas's arrival. Robert hadn't seen his brother in nearly 4 years. The estrangement had begun after the accident, when Thomas had gently suggested grief counseling and Robert had lashed out, accusing him of minimizing his loss. Now, seeing Thomas, older, with more gray in his beard, but the same kind eyes, Robert felt a rush of regret for the wasted years. Tommy, he said, using the childhood nickname. Thomas stepped forward and embraced him without hesitation. It's good to see you, Rob. I just wish it were under different circumstances. Together, the 3 men strategized. Thomas reviewed the medical records Robert had obtained, his professional expertise spotting additional inconsistencies. The reported injuries don't align with the accident description, he noted. And this DNA test, the way it's documented, suggests deliberate obfuscation rather than inconclusive results. Someone didn't want a clear answer. Could you perform a new DNA test? Robert asked. Discreetly. Thomas nodded. I brought equipment to collect samples. But Robert, you need to prepare yourself for either outcome. The evidence is compelling but not definitive. I know my daughter, Robert replied firmly. Their planning was interrupted by a delighted squeal from the garden. Through the study window, they could see Emma running through the newly cleared pathways, arms outstretched as she chased a butterfly, a monarch with vibrant orange wings. The pure joy on her face was captivating. Is that her? Thomas asked, quietly. Robert nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She has Eleanor's smile, Thomas observed. And your determination. I saw her replanting that bush 3 times until she got it exactly right. After finalizing their immediate plans, Robert returned to the garden. Emma was kneeling by the eastern flower bed, digging intently. What are you doing over there? He called. Emma looked up, excitement lighting her features. I found something. Come see. Robert joined her, noticing that she had uncovered a small metal box embedded in the soil. His heart skipped a beat. Eleanor's time capsule. They had buried it together on Charlotte's 5th birthday, planning to open it on her 16th. It's like a treasure chest, Emma explained, brushing dirt from the lid. Should we open it? With trembling hands, Robert knelt beside her. Yes, I think it's time. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid, revealing the contents preserved inside a waterproof liner, photographs of Eleanor, Charlotte, and Robert, Charlotte's first lost tooth, a handwritten letter from Eleanor, and a small book of pressed flowers from the garden. Emma gasped as she gently lifted out a photograph of Eleanor holding a baby Charlotte. "She's so pretty," she whispered. "She looks like an angel." "She was," Robert agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "That's my wife, Eleanor, and our daughter, Charlotte." Emma studied the photograph, her finger tracing the baby's face. "She has the same eyes as me." "Yes," Robert said softly. "She does." At the bottom of the box lay a sealed envelope with "For the Butterfly" written on it in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. This had been her nickname for Charlotte, inspired by the child's love of the colorful insects. "What does it say?" Emma asked. Robert carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside, reading aloud, "My dearest Butterfly, if you're reading this, you've grown into the beautiful girl I always knew you would become. Remember that like the butterfly, you were born to transform and soar. No matter what happens, know that your wings will always carry you home. All my love, Mom." Tears streamed down Robert's face. Beside him, Emma was similarly affected, though she couldn't possibly understand the full significance. Or could she? "I dream about butterflies," she whispered. "They show me the way home in my dreams." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson calling from the terrace. "Mr. Blackwood, you have visitors." Robert turned to see two police officers standing beside Mrs. Peterson. Behind them, looking smugly triumphant, stood Sarah Jenkins from Brightwood Children's Home. "Mr. Blackwood," one officer began, "we've received a report that you're detaining a minor against her guardian's wishes. Ms. Jenkins has documentation showing she has temporary oversight of Emma Wilson's placement." Jenkins stepped forward. "Margaret Wilson contacted us, very concerned that Emma hasn't returned home. As her case supervisor, I have a responsibility to ensure her safety." Robert stood protectively in front of Emma. "Margaret Wilson drove Emma here herself this morning. She explicitly agreed that Emma could stay for dinner and that I would drive her home afterward." "That's not what Ms. Wilson tells us," Jenkins replied smoothly. "She says Emma was only supposed to be here for 2 hours. She's quite distraught." Emma moved closer to Robert, her small hand slipping into his. "I don't want to go with her," she whispered. "Please don't make me." The officers looked uncomfortable, caught in what was clearly becoming a complicated situation. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have documentation authorizing you to keep the child?" Before Robert could respond, Thomas appeared on the terrace. "Officers, I'm Dr. Thomas Blackwood, Chief of Pediatric Surgery at OHSU. I've been examining this child as part of an ongoing investigation into potential medical fraud and identity concealment. I believe she may have been the victim of a serious crime." His authoritative tone and professional credentials created enough doubt to pause the proceedings. Bennett joined them, introducing himself as Robert's attorney and presenting the emergency motions he had filed earlier that day. "My client has reason to believe this child may be his daughter, Charlotte Blackwood, who was incorrectly identified as deceased following an accident 5 years ago. We have substantial evidence suggesting deliberate misidentification and fraudulent placement." Jenkins's composure cracked slightly. "This is absurd. Emma Wilson has been in the system for years. Her case file is complete." "Is it?" Bennett countered. "Because our preliminary investigation has uncovered numerous irregularities, including falsified signatures on her placement documents." The confrontation might have escalated further if not for a sudden commotion from the garden. A section of the newly restored rose trellis had caught fire, flames quickly spreading to the surrounding plants. Smoke billowed into the air as the dry, dead sections of the garden provided perfect kindling. "Emma!" Robert shouted, but she was already running toward the house away from the flames. While everyone rushed to contain the fire, officers radioing for assistance, Mrs. Peterson bringing garden hoses, Robert noticed a figure slipping away through the side gate. The man moved with purpose, his task accomplished, creating enough chaos to disrupt the standoff. By the time the fire was extinguished, significant damage had been done to the garden's eastern section, including the butterfly garden they had worked so hard to restore. Emma stood at the edge of the destruction, her expression devastated. "They broke our garden," she said, her voice small but angry. "Why would someone do that?" Robert knelt beside her, looking directly into those familiar blue eyes. "Sometimes people do terrible things when they're afraid of losing something, but we won't let them win. We'll rebuild it, better than before." In the aftermath, Jenkins was forced to retreat without Emma. The officers, witnessing the suspicious nature of the fire and impressed by Bennett's legal documentation, agreed to a temporary compromise. Emma would return to Margaret Wilson's care, but a welfare check would be conducted and an emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. As Robert prepared to drive Emma home, Thomas discreetly collected DNA samples, a strand of hair, a drinking glass, that would hopefully provide the definitive proof they needed. "Will I still be able to come tomorrow?" Emma asked as they pulled up to Margaret's apartment building, a dilapidated structure that made Robert's heart ache for what his daughter had endured. "I'll make sure of it," he promised. "We have a garden to rebuild." Emma unbuckled her seatbelt but hesitated before getting out. "Mr. Blackwood, that letter in the box, do you think the butterfly ever found her way home?" Robert fought back tears. "I believe she's finding her way right now." After watching Emma safely enter the building, Robert sat in his car gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The fire was a warning, a message that whoever had orchestrated this deception was watching and would go to extreme lengths to maintain their lie. But they had underestimated two things: the bond between father and daughter that had survived despite their separation, and Robert Blackwood's determination. The garden might be damaged, but its foundations remained. And like the garden, his family would bloom again, stronger than before. Seattle's courthouse bustled with morning activity as Robert adjusted his tie, preparing for the emergency hearing. Bennett stood beside him, reviewing their strategy one final time. The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, investigations, and careful documentation building. Thomas had expedited the DNA analysis through a colleague's private lab, and the results sat sealed in an envelope inside Bennett's briefcase. Results Robert had insisted on not knowing until they were revealed in court. "Remember," Bennett cautioned, "Judge Patterson is known for his by-the-book approach. We need to present our case methodically without emotional appeals. The evidence must speak for itself." Robert nodded, though containing his emotions seemed an impossible task when his daughter's future hung in the balance. Emma had continued visiting the garden daily, with Margaret surprisingly cooperative after the welfare check, likely because the social worker had found her apartment spotlessly clean and the refrigerator fully stocked, courtesy of an anonymous delivery service Robert had arranged. Their work restoring the fire-damaged sections had created an even deeper bond. Emma had shown an uncanny ability to recall exactly where each plant had been positioned originally, often saying things like, "The blue hydrangeas were Mom's favorites, so they should go here, by the bench where she used to read." Each such comment had strengthened Robert's conviction, making this legal battle not just about justice, but about healing wounds that had festered for 5 long years. As they entered the courtroom, Robert immediately spotted James Harrington, seated confidently beside his attorney Raymond Walsh, one of Seattle's most expensive legal sharks. Sarah Jenkins sat nearby, whispering to Margaret Wilson, who looked uncomfortable in a hastily purchased business suit. The sight of these conspirators assembled sent a wave of cold fury through Robert. His attention shifted when Emma entered with her court-appointed guardian ad litem, a kind-faced woman named Olivia Chen. Emma wore a navy blue dress that Robert recognized as a recent purchase delivered mistakenly to Margaret's apartment. Her hair was neatly braided, and when she spotted Robert, her face lit up before she quickly schooled her expression to something more neutral, a child who had learned to hide her feelings in adult situations. Judge Patterson, a stern-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, called the court to order. "This is an unusual emergency hearing concerning the guardianship and potential identity of the minor currently known as Emma Wilson. I understand there are multiple parties with significant claims." What followed was a complex legal dance, with Walsh immediately moving to dismiss the entire proceeding as the delusional pursuit of a grieving father, unable to accept reality. Bennett countered with the documented irregularities in the hospital records, the suspicious timing of Jenkins' promotion, and the falsified signatures on Emma's placement papers. "Your Honor," Bennett continued, "we have compelling evidence that the child known as Emma Wilson is, in fact, Charlotte Blackwood, daughter of my client, who was incorrectly identified as deceased following a tragic accident 5 years ago." Walsh scoffed. "Compelling evidence? Mr. Blackwood buried his daughter. He identified the body himself." "In a closed casket," Bennett countered. After being told by hospital staff that the injuries were too severe for viewing, a highly unusual protocol for which we can find no documentation or medical justification. The arguments continued, with Jenkins testifying that all proper procedures had been followed in Emma's case. Under Bennett's cross-examination, however, her story began to unravel. She couldn't explain the judge's signature on documents when he had been out of the country, nor account for the substantial donation from Harrington Enterprises that coincided with Emma's placement. Margaret Wilson proved an even weaker witness. Faced with documents showing she was a distant cousin of Harrington's former assistant and bank records revealing monthly payments from a shell corporation traced back to Harrington, she began to crumble. "I was just doing what they told me," she finally admitted, avoiding Emma's hurt gaze. "They said the kid needed someplace to stay and I needed the money. I didn't know where she came from." "Did you ever question why you were being paid to care for this particular child?" Bennett pressed. Margaret squirmed. "They said she was important to some business deal. I didn't ask questions." A business deal. The cold calculation of it all, treating a child as a pawn in a corporate vendetta, silenced the courtroom. When James Harrington took the stand, his confident demeanor remained intact. He denied any involvement in Emma's placement, dismissed the financial connections as standard charitable contributions, and expressed sincere sympathy for Mr. Blackwood's continued suffering. "Mr. Harrington," Bennett began his cross-examination, "can you explain why your personal assistant contacted Seattle General Hospital 17 times in the 2 days following the accident involving Eleanor and Charlotte Blackwood?" Harrington's composure flickered briefly. "I was concerned about the family of a business associate you had threatened just 1 week earlier. I quote from an email sent from your account. 'Blackwood will regret the day he crossed me. I'll take everything that matters to him.'" "Business rhetoric," Harrington dismissed. "Hardly uncommon in our competitive industry." "And Gregory Newell, the hospital administrator who oversaw the processing of Charlotte Blackwood's case, can you explain why he received a $250,000 wire transfer from your offshore account 3 days after signing the death certificate?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Patterson called for order, his expression grave. Bennett wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Harrington orchestrated an elaborate scheme to separate Mr. Blackwood from his surviving daughter, a scheme involving medical fraud, falsification of government documents, and the psychological torment of both a child and her father." Walsh jumped to his feet. "Objection! Counsel is making unsubstantiated accusations." "They're quite substantiated," Bennett replied calmly, presenting a flash drive. "This contains testimony from Gregory Newell, recorded yesterday, detailing Mr. Harrington's instructions regarding Charlotte Blackwood's case. Mr. Newell has entered witness protection in exchange for his cooperation." It was a masterful move that Robert hadn't been privy to. Bennett had been working angles behind the scenes that even his client didn't know about. Harrington leaned over to whisper urgently to Walsh, his facade of confidence crumbling. Walsh's face paled as he listened. The most compelling testimony, however, came from Thomas. With his medical expertise and professional reputation, he methodically dismantled the official account of Charlotte's identification, pointing out inconsistencies in the autopsy report and explaining how the inconclusive DNA test appeared deliberately mishandled. "In my professional opinion," Thomas concluded, "there is significant evidence suggesting medical fraud and identity concealment in this case." Finally, Judge Patterson addressed the matter they had all been waiting for. "Dr. Blackwood, I understand you've conducted a new DNA comparison." Thomas nodded. Yes, Your Honor, with samples from both Robert Blackwood and the child known as Emma Wilson. And the results. All eyes turned to Bennett as he removed the sealed envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Thomas, who opened it carefully. The results indicate a 99.9997% probability that Emma Wilson is the biological daughter of Robert Blackwood, Thomas announced, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. She is, without question, Charlotte Blackwood. The courtroom fell silent. Robert closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed not by surprise, but by validation of what his heart had known from the first moment Emma appeared at his door. Emma, who had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings, suddenly spoke up. "Can I say something, please?" Judge Patterson seemed startled but nodded. "You may, young lady." Emma stood, smoothing her dress nervously. "I've been having these dreams for as long as I can remember. Dreams about a big house with a beautiful garden full of butterflies, about a woman who sang to me and a man who carried me on his shoulders." Her voice trembled slightly. "I always thought they were just dreams because Aunt Margaret said my parents didn't want me. But when I started working in Mr. Blackwood's garden, everything felt right, like I'd been there before." She turned to look directly at Robert. "And when I'm with him, I feel safe, like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Even Judge Patterson seemed moved by her simple eloquence. "Thank you, Emma, or should I say Charlotte?" Emma smiled shyly. "I think I've always been Charlotte, I just didn't know it." The legal victory should have been straightforward after that, but Walsh played his final card, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the collapsing case. "Your Honor, while this situation is certainly unusual, we must consider the child's best interests. Mr. Blackwood has been living as a recluse for years. His mental state following the accident and his wife's passing has been questionable at best. Is he truly prepared to provide a stable home for a 10-year-old girl?" It was a calculated attack, aimed at Robert's most vulnerable point, his years of isolation and grief. For a moment, doubt clouded Judge Patterson's expression. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge addressed him directly, "how do you respond to these concerns?" Robert stood, gathering his thoughts. "Your Honor, 5 years ago I lost my wife and thought I had lost my daughter. The pain was unbearable. I withdrew from the world because I couldn't see any place in it for me anymore." He glanced at Emma, drawing strength from her attentive gaze. "But when Emma came back into my life, something changed. The garden she's helped restore is more than just plants and flowers. It's a symbol of what we're rebuilding. Together," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I can't change the past 5 years, I can't undo the time we've lost, but I can promise that from this day forward, my daughter will have everything she needs. Not just material comforts, but love, support, and the stable home she deserves." Judge Patterson studied him thoughtfully. "And the isolation? Your withdrawal from society?" "Ended the moment she rang my doorbell," Robert answered honestly. "Your Honor, I've reconnected with my brother, reopened my home, and started to engage with life again, all because of Charlotte. She hasn't just revived the garden, she's revived me." The judge nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the overwhelming evidence presented, I am ruling that the child legally known as Emma Wilson is in fact Charlotte Blackwood. Full custody is granted to her father, Robert Blackwood, effective immediately." He looked directly at Harrington. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation into medical fraud, document falsification, and conspiracy charges." Harrington's face contorted with rage as he was led away by his attorney, already planning appeals and counter-moves. But for now, at least, justice had prevailed. As the courtroom cleared, Emma, now legally Charlotte again, approached, Robert hesitantly, as if unsure of the protocol in this new reality. "Does this mean I get to stay with you for real?" Robert knelt to her level. "Yes, it does, if that's what you want." "More than anything," she whispered, then threw her arms around his neck in their first real embrace. Robert held her tightly, feeling the pieces of his shattered heart finally begin to mend. Thomas joined them, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. "Welcome back to the family, Charlotte. "Uncle Tommy," she said, testing the words before breaking into a smile. "I like that." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Charlotte suddenly stopped. "What about Aunt Margaret? She wasn't very good at taking care of me, but sometimes she tried, and she seemed scared of that man." Her compassion, so like Eleanor's, brought fresh tears to Robert's eyes. "We'll make sure she gets help," he promised. "People who are hurting sometimes hurt others. That doesn't make it right, but it means they need help too." Outside, reporters had gathered, word having spread about the extraordinary case. Robert shielded Charlotte from their questions as they made their way to the car. "They want to know our story," Charlotte observed. "It's a pretty amazing one," Robert agreed. "But right now it's just for us. We have a lot of catching up to do." As they drove toward Evergreen Manor, toward home, Charlotte gazed out the window thoughtfully. "Can we still work on the garden tomorrow? I have ideas for replanting. The section that got burned." "Absolutely," Robert replied, his heart full. "I think the butterfly bushes will grow back stronger than ever." "Just like us," Charlotte said softly, reaching for his hand. Robert squeezed her small fingers gently, marveling at the resilience of this child who, despite everything, had found her way back to where she belonged. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be adjustments, therapy, and likely continued legal battles as Harrington fought the criminal charges. But they would face it all together, a family reborn from the ashes of tragedy. Like the garden, they would bloom again. Autumn painted Seattle in shades of amber and crimson as Charlotte settled into life at Evergreen Manor. 3 months had passed since the court ruling, a period of adjustment filled with both joy and challenges. The garden had recovered remarkably from the fire, with new growth pushing through the scorched earth, a fitting metaphor for their own journey of renewal. Charlotte's bedroom had been thoughtfully redecorated, preserving elements of her childhood while acknowledging the person she was becoming. The butterfly theme remained, but now accompanied by art supplies that reflected her newfound passion for drawing. Her artwork covered one wall, detailed sketches of the garden in various stages of restoration, each capturing not just the physical transformation, but the emotional one as well. On this particular morning, Charlotte sat at the kitchen island, concentrating on her homeschool assignment. Robert had hired a tutor to help bridge the educational gaps resulting from her inconsistent schooling with Margaret. They planned to transition her to Lakeside School after the winter break, once she felt ready for the social dynamics of Seattle's most prestigious private academy. "How's the math coming along?" Robert asked, pouring himself a second cup of coffee. Charlotte wrinkled her nose. "Fractions are tricky, but Ms. Winters says I'm catching up fast." "She says you're exceeding expectations in every subject," Robert corrected with pride. "Especially art." Charlotte's talents had blossomed under the guidance of a local artist Robert had brought in twice weekly. Her drawings had evolved from simple sketches to nuanced works that captured the emotional essence of her subjects. Most striking were her Butterfly Garden series, vibrant pieces that Seattle's prestigious Elliott Gallery had expressed interest in displaying. "Dad?" Charlotte's voice pulled Robert from his thoughts. The word still gave him a thrill every time she used it. The transition from Mr. Blackwood had happened naturally about a month after she moved in. "Can we invite Uncle Tommy for Thanksgiving? And Miss Chen? She was nice to me during the court stuff." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. "Anyone else you'd like to include?" Charlotte hesitated. "What about Mr. Davis, the neighbor who helped us with the rose bushes?" Henry Davis, their reclusive neighbor, had been an unexpected ally. After the story broke in local news, he had appeared at their gate one morning with heritage rose cuttings and decades of gardening knowledge. The elderly man had recognized Charlotte immediately, having often watched from his window as Eleanor and Charlotte tended the garden years before. His testimony about seeing suspicious activity near the Blackwood estate on the night of the accident had provided additional evidence against Harrington. "Mr. Davis is definitely invited," Robert confirmed. "I think he'd be honored." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Peterson, who had blossomed in her role as surrogate grandmother to Charlotte, went to answer it. "Mr. Blackwood," she called moments later, her voice tense. "It's Mr. Walsh and someone from your company." Robert exchanged a concerned glance with Charlotte before heading to the foyer. Raymond Walsh stood impeccably dressed as always, his expression unreadable. Beside him was Jeffrey Parker, Robert's former corporate counsel, who had stayed with Blackwood Technologies after Robert's departure. "Robert," Parker began, sounding uncomfortable, "I apologize for the unannounced visit." "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Robert asked coolly, not inviting them further into the house. Walsh stepped forward. "My client, Mr. Harrington, wishes to propose a settlement arrangement regarding the unfortunate situation with your daughter." "There's nothing to settle," Robert replied. "The courts have ruled, and the criminal investigation is proceeding." "Yes. Well," Walsh continued smoothly, "criminal proceedings can be lengthy and uncertain. Mr. Harrington is prepared to offer substantial compensation for any distress caused in exchange for dropping the criminal complaints." Robert's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting I put a price tag on 5 years of my daughter's life? On the trauma she endured?" "Be reasonable, Robert," Parker interjected. "A protracted legal battle isn't in anyone's interest, especially Charlotte's. Children need stability, not courtroom appearances and media attention." "How would you know what my daughter needs?" Robert challenged. Walsh signaled to Parker, who reluctantly opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "There's something else to consider. During his time as CEO, you made certain discretionary decisions regarding Taiwanese manufacturing contracts. Decisions that viewed through today's regulatory lens could be problematic." The implied threat was clear. Harrington was prepared to expose past business dealings to distract from his own crimes. It was a desperate move, but potentially effective in creating enough scandal to muddy the waters of public opinion. "See," Robert said quietly, "so this is blackmail." "It's pragmatism," Walsh corrected. "Mr. Harrington simply wants to resolve this situation and move forward. $20 million is a generous offer." Before Robert could respond, Charlotte appeared in the doorway behind him. "Dad, is everything okay?" The lawyers looked startled by her presence. Charlotte had grown in the past months, not just physically, but in confidence. Her eyes, so like Eleanor's, assessed the visitors with surprising perception. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Robert assured her. "These gentlemen were just leaving." "Actually," Walsh said, his tone softening artificially, "you must be Charlotte. I'm Raymond Walsh, a business associate of your father's." Charlotte didn't return his smile. "You work for the man who kept me from my dad," she stated bluntly. "The one who paid Aunt Margaret to lie to me." Walsh flinched at her directness. "Young lady, it's much more complicated than—" "No, it's not," Charlotte interrupted. "He did bad things because he was angry at my dad. And now you're here trying to make it go away with money." She stepped closer to Robert. "My mom used to say that integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard. Dad taught me that." Again. Robert placed a protective hand on her shoulder, overwhelmed with pride. "Mr. Walsh, Mr. Parker, I believe my daughter has made our position clear. We won't be accepting any settlements or responding to threats. Now I'll have to ask you to leave." As the men departed, Charlotte watched them through the window. "They looked upset," she observed. "They're not used to losing," Robert explained, still processing the encounter. Charlotte's intuitive understanding of the situation and her unwavering moral clarity had caught him off guard. "Will that man try to hurt us again?" she asked. Robert chose honesty. "He might try, but we have something stronger than his money or influence. We have the truth and we have each other." Charlotte nodded solemnly before her expression brightened. "Can we work on the mosaic stepping stones today? I finished the butterfly design." The ease with which she moved between profound insights and childlike enthusiasm never ceased to amaze Robert. It was one of many qualities that reminded him of Eleanor. Later that afternoon, as they pressed colored glass pieces into concrete, Bennett called with updates. The district attorney was proceeding with charges against Harrington, Jenkins, and several hospital administrators. Furthermore, Parker's appearance at Evergreen Manor had violated ethical standards, resulting in disciplinary action from the State Bar Association. Harrington's getting desperate, Bennett concluded. His corporate board is considering ousting him, and several major clients have suspended contracts pending the outcome of the investigation. What about the manufacturing contracts he threatened to expose? Robert asked, moving away from Charlotte, to speak privately. I've reviewed the documentation. There were some grey areas, certainly, but nothing illegal or even particularly scandalous by industry standards. It's a paper tiger, Robert. He's bluffing. Relief washed over him. Thank you, Michael, for everything. Don't thank me yet. There's another matter we need to discuss. Bennett's tone grew serious. I've been contacted by Lily Carter's attorney. Robert froze at the mention of his ex-wife's name. Lily had been Eleanor's sister, and their brief marriage following Eleanor's passing had been a misguided attempt to preserve a connection to her. The relationship had imploded spectacularly, with Lily leaving Seattle shortly after the divorce was finalized. What does she want? Robert asked warily. She's heard about Charlotte through the media coverage. She's requesting visitation rights as her aunt. Robert's instinct was immediate rejection. Lily had made no attempt to maintain a relationship with him after their divorce, showing no interest in preserving family connections. Where had she been for the past 5 years? I'll need to think about it, he said finally, and discuss it with Charlotte. After ending the call, Robert found Charlotte adding the final pieces to her butterfly mosaic. The design was intricate and beautiful, blue and gold glass forming wings that seemed almost in flight. That's extraordinary, he commented, genuinely impressed. Charlotte beamed at the praise. It's for Mom. I thought we could put it by her favorite bench. The casual reference to Eleanor, a mother she was gradually remembering through fragments of memory and stories Robert shared, warmed his heart. She would have loved it. As they worked side by side, Robert carefully broached the subject of Lily. Charlotte, do you remember anything about your Aunt Lily, your mother's sister? Charlotte's hands stilled. I think so. She wore very strong perfume and she laughed really loud. She tilted her head thoughtfully. She got mad at you a lot. Robert couldn't help smiling at the accurate assessment. Yes, that sounds like Lily. She's heard that you're home now, and she's asked to see you. Did she look for me when I was lost? Charlotte asked perceptively. No, Robert admitted. She and we didn't handle our grief well. We hurt each other and then she moved away. Charlotte considered this. People make mistakes when they're sad. Like you shutting everyone out, and me believing Aunt Margaret's lies because I wanted a family so badly. Her wisdom continually amazed him. Maybe Aunt Lily deserves another chance too. Before Robert could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared at the garden door. Mr. Blackwood, there's a call you should take. It's Margaret Wilson. Robert excused himself, puzzled by this unexpected contact. Margaret had kept her distance since the custody hearing, participating in the ongoing investigation, primarily through her attorney. Mr. Blackwood, her voice sounded strained on the phone. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you should know. Harrington's people came to see me yesterday. They offered money for me to change my testimony, say I never received payments from them. And what did you tell them? Robert asked, cautiously. I told them to go to hell. Margaret's voice cracked. Look, I know I was terrible to Emma, Charlotte. I was drunk most of the time and I needed the money, but what they did to that little girl, what they made me part of. I can't live with myself if I don't make it right. Robert was silent, processing this unexpected development. There's more, Margaret continued. They mentioned something about the garden, said it was a shame about the fire, and worse things could happen. I think they're planning something. Mr. Blackwood, I thought you should know. After thanking her for the warning, Robert immediately contacted Bennett and their security team. The threat, veiled as it was, couldn't be ignored, especially with Charlotte finally feeling safe in her home. That evening, as Robert tucked Charlotte into bed, a ritual they both cherished, she asked about the extra security personnel she had noticed patrolling the grounds. Just a precaution, Robert explained, not wanting to frighten her. Charlotte studied his face with those perceptive eyes. Because of the men who came today, the ones who work for him? Robert nodded, never underestimating her awareness. Yes, but you don't need to worry. We're taking every precaution. I'm not scared, she said with surprising conviction. Not anymore. Bad things happened, but look what we found because of them, each other. She reached for the silver butterfly bracelet on her nightstand. the one Robert had preserved all these years, and returned to her on the day she officially came home. Mum used to say butterflies aren't afraid of storms because they know they can fly above them. She was very wise, your mother, Robert said softly. Like me, Charlotte grinned, breaking the solemn moment. Robert laughed. Exactly like you. He left her room. Robert's phone buzzed with a text from Bennett. DNA evidence confirmed. Grand jury indictment tomorrow. H will be arrested by morning. The legal wheels were finally turning toward justice. With Harrington facing arrest, the immediate threat might diminish, but Robert knew better than to let his guard down. Men like Harrington, cornered and desperate, were capable of lashing out in unpredictable ways. In his study, Robert reviewed the security measures they had implemented: cameras, motion sensors, additional personnel. The estate was as protected as it could be without turning it into a fortress, which he refused to do. Charlotte had spent too long in confined, restricted environments. Her home needed to feel like a sanctuary, not a prison. Through the window, he could see the garden illuminated by landscape lighting, Eleanor's vision restored and enhanced through Charlotte's instinctive understanding of its design. The butterfly mosaic they had completed that afternoon caught the light, its glass pieces glinting like captured stars. Robert's thoughts turned to Lily's request. Despite their painful history, she was Charlotte's only connection to Eleanor's family. Perhaps Charlotte was right about second chances. They had all made mistakes in their grief, taken wrong turns in attempting to navigate loss. If nothing else, the past 5 years had taught him the value of forgiveness, both giving and receiving it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Harrington's arrest, potential retaliation, decisions about Lily's role in their lives. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, Robert allowed himself to simply be grateful. His daughter was home, sleeping peacefully down the hall. The garden was healing, and somehow against all odds they were becoming a family again, different from before, shaped by their separate journeys, but together at last. Outside, a late monarch butterfly, perhaps the last of the season, landed on the window. Glass, its orange wings vibrant against the darkness. A messenger from Eleanor, Robert liked to think, watching over their butterfly child who had finally found her way home. Spring arrived at Evergreen Manor in a symphony of colors and scents. The garden, once a testament to grief and abandonment, now flourished with new life, much like its caretakers. 1 year had passed since Charlotte had first appeared on Robert's doorstep, a year of healing, growth, and unexpected blessings amid the challenges. The legal proceedings against James Harrington had concluded with a comprehensive guilty verdict. The man who had orchestrated the elaborate deception now faced years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of child endangerment. Sarah Jenkins had accepted a plea deal in exchange for her testimony, while several hospital administrators had lost their licenses. Justice, while not erasing the past, had provided a foundation for closure. On this particular Saturday morning, the garden buzzed with activity as Robert and Charlotte prepared for a special celebration. Colorful streamers adorned the restored pergola, and tables arranged throughout. The garden awaited the arrival of guests. Today marked not only the official unveiling of the fully restored garden, but Charlotte's 11th birthday, her first proper celebration since returning home. "Dad," Charlotte called from near the koi pond, where she was arranging floating candles. "Uncle Tommy just texted. His flight landed early and he's on his way." Robert smiled at her excitement. Thomas had become a regular visitor over the past year, spending 1 weekend each month at the manor. Their brotherly relationship, once fractured by grief and misunderstanding, had been rebuilt alongside the garden paths. "Perfect timing," Robert replied, adjusting a string of lights. Mrs. Peterson was just asking when he'd arrived to taste test her appetizers. Charlotte laughed, knowing the ongoing culinary competition between Thomas and Mrs. Peterson, a friendly rivalry that always resulted in spectacular meals for the rest of them. She wore a new dress for the occasion, blue with subtle butterfly embroidery, and her golden hair had grown longer, now falling past her shoulders in gentle waves that reminded Robert painfully and joyfully of Eleanor. The past year had been one of tremendous growth for Charlotte. Her transition to Lakeside School had gone remarkably well, her academic abilities quickly overcoming the gaps in her earlier education. More importantly, she had begun to form friendships, gradually opening herself to trust after years of instability. Her art continued to flourish, with her Butterfly Garden series now permanently displayed in the children's wing of Seattle General Hospital, a transformation of the very institution that had been part of her separation from her father. Her memories of Eleanor had returned in fragments, moments of recognition triggered by scents, sounds, or stories Robert shared. They had established a tradition of planting something new in Eleanor's honor on the first Saturday of each month, marking the garden with her ongoing presence in their lives. Ms. Chen just pulled up, Charlotte announced, spotting the familiar car through the garden gate, and she brought someone with her. Robert looked up to see Olivia Chen, Charlotte's former guardian ad litem who had become a family friend, walking up the path. Beside her was a woman Robert hadn't expected to see today, Margaret Wilson. Since her unexpected warning about Harrington's threats, Margaret had entered a rehabilitation program maintaining sporadic contact primarily through her therapist. Her appearance today was surprising, especially given Charlotte's mixed feelings about the woman who had been her neglectful caretaker for 5 years. Charlotte froze momentarily before squaring her shoulders and walking toward the visitors. Robert followed closely, unsure how this unexpected reunion would unfold. "Hello, Ms. Chen," Charlotte greeted warmly, before turning to Margaret with more reserved politeness. "Hello, Aunt Margaret." The aunt title was a courtesy now, acknowledging their shared history without the false family connection. Margaret looked significantly better than when Robert had last seen her, sober, properly groomed, with clear eyes and steady hands. "Happy birthday, Charlotte," Margaret said, her voice carrying uncharacteristic emotion. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Charlotte replied, her natural compassion overcoming any lingering resentment. "I'm glad you could come." Margaret glanced at Robert. "I wasn't sure I should, but Ms. Chen thought it might be healing for all of us." She held out a small, carefully wrapped package. "This is for you. It's not much, but—" Charlotte accepted the gift with grace. "Thank you. Would you like to see the garden? It's completely different from when you drove me here that first day." As Charlotte led Margaret on a tour, Olivia approached Robert. "I hope it was all right to bring her. She's been working very hard in her recovery program, and seeing Charlotte thriving might be important for her own healing process." "Charlotte seems comfortable with it," Robert observed. "She has an extraordinary capacity for forgiveness." "Like her father," Olivia noted with a smile. The moment was interrupted by Thomas's arrival, followed shortly by Henry Davis and several of Charlotte's school friends and their parents. The garden gradually filled with guests, creating the kind of joyful gathering that hadn't occurred at Evergreen Manor in over 6 years. As Robert watched Charlotte move easily among the guests, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Despite everything she had endured, the separation, the years of neglect, the confusion about her identity, she had emerged with a resilient spirit and an open heart. Therapy had helped, certainly, but there was something innately strong in her character that reminded him of both himself and Eleanor. "She's remarkable," said a voice beside him, a voice he hadn't heard in person for nearly 5 years. Robert turned to find Lily Carter standing nearby, elegant in a simple green dress, her dark hair shorter than he remembered. Their initial reunion 2 months ago had been tense and awkward, but for Charlotte's sake, they had forged a cautious peace. Today marked Lily's second visit to Evergreen Manor since re-entering their lives. "She is," Robert agreed. "Eleanor would be proud." The mention of her sister, once a source of pain between them, now served as common ground. Their brief, misguided marriage had been an attempt to hold on to Eleanor through each other, doomed from the start by unprocessed grief and impossible expectations. "I brought something," Lily said, opening her purse. "I found it when I was going through my mother's things after she passed last month." She handed Robert a small leather-bound book with worn edges. Opening it, he recognized Eleanor's handwriting immediately. It was her original storybook of The Whispering Rose, complete with her own illustrations. "Eleanor made this for Charlotte's 5th birthday," Lily explained. "She left it at our parents' house the weekend before." She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. "I thought Charlotte should have it." "Thank you," Robert said sincerely. "This will mean the world to her." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the final guest. Bennett, who had become more friend than attorney over the course of their legal battles. He carried a large envelope along with his gift. "Sorry I'm late," he apologized. "I had to stop by the office to pick up the final paperwork." He handed the envelope to Robert. "It's official. The Blackwood Foundation for Child Advocacy is fully approved. You can announce it today if you'd like." The foundation had been Robert's response to their ordeal, a way to prevent other children from falling through the cracks of flawed systems. Using his business acumen and resources, he had created an organization dedicated to legal advocacy for children in complex custody situations, with a special focus on cases involving potential identity fraud or documentation irregularities. "Perfect timing," Robert replied. "I was planning to mention it during the garden dedication." As the party reached its peak, Robert called for everyone's attention. Guests gathered around the central fountain. The one Charlotte had instinctively known featured dolphin sculptures, where a small podium had been placed. "Thank you all for coming today," Robert began. "This celebration marks 2 significant events: Charlotte's 11th birthday and the completion of our garden restoration project." Charlotte stood beside him, beaming with pride as he continued. "Many of you know parts of our story, how Charlotte found her way back to this garden and in doing so, found her way home. What began as a simple offer from a rain-soaked child to help with some weeding became a journey of rediscovery, healing and justice." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, many of whom had followed the high-profile case through media coverage or personal connection. Eleanor created this garden as a sanctuary, a place where beauty could flourish and spirits could be renewed. In the years following her passing, I allowed it to fall into ruin, much like I had allowed myself to do. Robert's voice carried emotion, but remained steady. "It took Charlotte's return to teach me that nothing is truly beyond saving, if you care enough." Charlotte squeezed his hand, recognizing her own words from their first encounter. "Today, as we celebrate both this garden's rebirth and Charlotte's birthday, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Blackwood Foundation for Child Advocacy. This organization will work to ensure that no child's identity is ever erased, that family bonds are protected, and that those who would manipulate the system for personal vendettas are held accountable." Applause followed the announcement, especially from those who understood the deeper significance. Bennett, Thomas, Olivia Chen, and others who had witnessed their struggle firsthand. "And now," Robert continued, "I'd like to ask Charlotte to officially unveil the garden's new centerpiece, a sculpture she designed herself." Charlotte stepped forward as Robert removed the covering from a stunning bronze sculpture at the fountain's edge, a life-sized figure of a young girl with butterfly wings, her arms outstretched as if preparing to take flight. The plaque at its base read simply, "For Eleanor, who taught us that butterflies always find their way home." As Charlotte cut the ceremonial ribbon, butterflies, released from specialized containers, took flight around them, filling the garden with vibrant wings of orange, blue, and yellow. The crowd gasped in delight at the magical moment, none more enchanted than Charlotte herself. The celebration continued with cake, music, and laughter, sounds that had once seemed impossible within the walls of Evergreen Manor. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Robert found Charlotte sitting on Eleanor's favorite bench, the leather-bound storybook from Lily open on her lap. "Mom wrote this," she said with wonder, tracing the illustrations with her fingertip. "I remember her reading it to me, doing different voices for all the characters." Robert sat beside her. "She created it just for you. The Whispering Rose was your special story." Charlotte looked up at the garden around them, now illuminated by strings of fairy lights as dusk settled in. "I think the whole garden whispers now. Not secrets exactly, but memories." "Good memories," Robert agreed. Mostly. Charlotte closed the book carefully. Dad, do you think we should invite Aunt Lily to stay with us sometimes? She seems sad, and she doesn't have anyone since Grandma died. Robert considered the suggestion. His relationship with Lily had evolved from bitter ex-spouses to cautious allies in Charlotte's life. Perhaps with time, they could become something, like family again, not through marriage but through their shared love for Eleanor and Charlotte. I think that's a generous idea, he replied. We could invite her for the Summer Arts Festival. She always enjoyed that. Charlotte nodded, satisfied with the plan. And maybe we could help Margaret sometimes too. She's trying to get better. You have your mother's compassionate heart, Robert observed. And your stubborn chin, Charlotte grinned, repeating what Mrs. Peterson often told her. She grew serious again. Do you think Mom knows that I found my way home? Robert looked up at the evening star just appearing in the twilight sky. I believe she does. I think perhaps she helped guide you here. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the day's final butterfly, a beautiful monarch, landed briefly on the bronze sculpture's outstretched hand before taking flight again, rising above the garden and disappearing into the gathering darkness. Later that night, after all the guests had departed and Charlotte had fallen asleep surrounded by her birthday presents, Robert stood at his study window overlooking the illuminated garden. The transformation was remarkable, not just in the physical landscape but in the emotional one. Where emptiness and grief had once reigned, now thrived connection and hope. The phone call came just as he was preparing for bed. Bennett with, one final piece of news. The adoption records for Emma Wilson have been officially nullified. The birth certificate has been corrected and reissued with her true identity. As of today, all legal documents confirm what we already knew. She is, and always has been, Charlotte Eleanor Blackwood. The final piece had fallen into place. The paper trail of deception had been erased, replaced with truth. Charlotte's identity, so carefully stolen and hidden, was fully restored. In her room, Robert found Charlotte sleeping peacefully, the butterfly bracelet on her wrist catching the moonlight from her window. On her nightstand sat a framed photograph, Eleanor holding infant Charlotte in the garden, their smiles mirroring each other. Beside it lay her sketchbook, open to her latest drawing, a garden path leading from darkness into light, butterflies marking the way forward. Robert gently adjusted her blanket and placed a kiss on her forehead. "Sweet dreams, my butterfly," he whispered. Outside, the garden stood as a testament to resilience and renewal, to the power of love to overcome even the most carefully constructed deceptions. Like the perennials Eleanor had planted years ago, truth had persisted beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge and bloom. And in the quiet of the night, if one listened closely enough, the roses might indeed